Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Robert Mallow with DHCD, and welcome to the SHERA program overview training. We know that you are busy, so we appreciate you making the time to join today. So we'll wait a few more minutes to give a chance everyone to log in. And while everyone is getting settled in, I'll spend a few moments walking through a few housekeeping items for you on how to engage during the training. So first, please mute to avoid any disruptions during the training. If at any point throughout today's session you have any questions, please send those in the Q&A. You should see this at the bottom of your screen on Zoom. We do have designated times throughout the session for question. Please again use the Q&A functionality during these times for those questions. And if we don't get to everyone's questions during the session, we will make sure to get back to you. And we will also be updating frequently asked questions on SHERA. So today's session is being recorded. If you do object to being recorded, please disconnect from the session and reach out to us so that we can work with you and find another way for you to get this information. So before we dive in, I did want to take a few seconds to introduce our speakers today. We have Henry Mukasa, who is the Director of Rental Management at Mass Housing. We have Cynthia Mohammed, who is the Director of Portfolio Management at Mass Housing Partnership. And again, my name is Robert Mallow. I am an Asset Management Redevelopment Specialist at DHCD. We have a whole team ready to support you and your staff as you get up to speed and comfortable with SHERA, the Subsidized Housing Emergency Rental Assistance Program. We also have great training supports with Viva Consulting and Accenture, two firms that are supporting the rollout of SHERA. So our journey today, we will start by reviewing our training goals and objectives. We will then get into the SHERA program overview. We will then talk about who is eligible for the program and what documentation is required. Following that, we will discuss the property owner's journey through the SHERA program. And then we'll end with some time for some questions and review the next steps. So today's training objective is to provide you with an understanding of the Subsidized Housing Emergency Rental Assistance Program and its policies. Our goal is to provide support both to property owners and managers, as well as tenants that are eligible for SHERA as they apply for assistance. But before we do get started, we do want to hear from you to better understand your role and get a sense of who's joining today. So we do have a live poll that we ask that you participate in. And to do so, you can follow the steps in your browser. Just go to menti.com, either through your smartphone or your computer. Once you are on that website, please enter that code that you see on the screen, and you'll see a prompt to answer that question of what role you're playing at the property and site. So we'll take a few moments to do that. Okay, I see a lot of property management staff, which is great. Some resident services staff. All right, this is great. This is good to know who's joining and who is getting this information. So we will continue. If you still do want to complete the poll, you absolutely may. We can revisit the results at the end. But I will move on to the next slide. Okay, so an overview of SHERA. This is a federally funded emergency housing assistance program for renters impacted by the coronavirus, COVID-19. So the purpose of SHERA is to help residents of both public and affordable housing clear their rent arrearages from between April 1st of 2020 to March 31st, 2021. Qualified owners of these rent restricted properties will be able to apply for assistance with rent arrearage on the accounts of all of their eligible tenants. So the idea behind SHERA is to collaborate with state agencies and quasi-public agencies, as well as qualifying owners of housing with income-based rental subsidies on behalf of their tenants. So as I had mentioned, eligible property owners will be able to apply for assistance on behalf of their tenants with rent arrearages for that time period of April 1st, 2020 through March 31st, 2021. By applying for SHERA assistance, owners continue their pledge to not evict tenants for non-payment of rent. This also relieves, the program also relieves the burden of regional administering agencies and the RAP Center, both of which are agencies administering the state's other emergency rental assistance programs, such as ERAP and RAFT. And through SHERA, tenants do not have to apply individually for assistance. Owners are encouraged to refer their tenants to the RAAs for other benefits, such as utilities and moving expenses, if that resident is deciding to relocate. The SHERA program is a collaboration and a joint effort between DHCD Mass Housing and Mass Housing Partnership. So we appreciate the collaborative nature of this program to make sure that we are providing rental assistance to households in need. As far as a program launch, we are conducting currently a soft launch or pilot of the program. So pilot members will be able to apply through the system, and the pilot members are from a volunteer owners working group composed of both private and public owners and a diversity of geographic and property types. After the pilot group, we will then open the application to other groups in 3 phases. The first phase comprises of mass housing and MHP portfolio of properties. The second phase is housing authority portfolios, as well as the DHCD subsidy portfolio. And then finally, 40B and 40R properties not included in those previous 2 groups. This slide outlines the process for owners to apply for and receive SHERA assistance. So I'll just take a moment to walk through the owner journey for SHERA. First, the owner or property manager designated on the owner's behalf will receive communications about the SHERA program and an information packet. Owners will be invited to register for SHERA through the SHERA online portal and attend a program outreach and owner awareness session. We do encourage you to attend these sessions, such as this one, before beginning to discuss the program with your residents. In discussing the program with your residents, you will be able to communicate with the tenants, gather application materials, and submit the application via the SHERA online portal. Those applications will then be reviewed, and approvals or denials will be communicated to the property owners, who then have the responsibility of informing the residents of the application status. And I will now turn it over to Henry.
Thank you, Rob. Good morning. I too extend my appreciation for you making the time to join us this morning. Please allow me to walk you through the owner eligibility for the program at this time. The first criteria owners must meet is the threshold eligibility. To meet this criteria, the owner must satisfy one of the following three conditions. Either the owner has an existing borrower relationship with Mass Housing or MHP, and their sponsor is in good standing with MHP and Mass Housing. The sponsor is a public housing authority, or the sponsor has at least one property subject to use restrictions due to participation in a state or federal program that has 20 or more housing units. The owner must meet criteria 2 and 3. Criteria 2 requires the owner's sponsor to be in good standing. That is, neither the owner nor its property should be in active default with Mass Housing, MHP, or DHT. I want to point out that sponsors with properties in forbearance are still considered to be in good standing. Criteria 3 requires that owners or their designated representative must have 3 years compliance experience and at least one staff member holding certification in compliance and training recognized by the affordable housing industry. A list of available certifications is available at SHERA-funding-mass.gov. I also would like to note that local housing authorities are exempt from this requirement. The fourth criteria for eligibility is signing the owner agreement. The owner agreement outlines their responsibilities and commitments. These commitments are listed on this slide and the next 2 slides. This slide is a continuation of the previous slide and further lists owner commitments. This slide is another continuation of the previous slides and further lists owner commitments, as you can see. I would be glad to take any questions in the QA as previously advised. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cynthia Mohammed. I am the Director of Portfolio Management here at MHP. And I'm going to talk with you now a little bit about property and household eligibility. Eligible owners can submit applications for properties that meet the following criteria. The first criteria is that it must be subsidized housing. Under SHERA, eligible properties are income restricted, affordable rental housing properties owned by eligible owners that A, receive state or federal subsidies in the form of grants, soft loans, tax credits, or preferential zoning obtained under chapters 40B or 40R that was used to subsidize their construction and or rehabilitation, and are subject to a recorded use restriction held by the Commonwealth or another state public or quasi-public agency, or by municipality if the property was developed under Chapter 40B or 40R. And B, if the properties that are currently receive project-based rental assistance under contracts administered by the Commonwealth or other state public or quasi-public agencies. The second criteria is that properties must be subject to an audit. Properties eligible for assistance the audit must be subject to an annual audit. This audit may be for a single purpose owner entity or for sponsor entities in the case of wholly owned owner entities whose properties are reflected in the sponsor's organizational audit. Or in the case of local housing authorities, the agreed upon procedures report. Two notes I would like to make for mixed income properties. While many eligible properties contain both income restricted and market rate units, the non-restricted units might possibly be occupied by low income residents. Owners are encouraged to apply for assistance for these households, provided that the owner can document that their current incomes are at or below 80% AMI. A scattered site property is eligible if, in the aggregate, at least some of the housing units are restricted to households at 80% AMI or less. So let's move on and talk a little bit about household eligibility. For a tenant to be eligible for assistance through SHERA, they must meet the following criteria. They must be able to demonstrate a risk of experiencing homelessness or housing instability. The household has an income at or below 80% AMI. The household has experienced a financial hardship due to COVID, direct or indirect. And the household has rental arrears from between April 1st, 2020 through March 31st, 2021. Let's talk about required tenant documentation. While SHERA takes the burden off applying off of the tenant, there is still some required documentation that they may need to provide to the owner. The owner will need records of income certification, financial hardship, and the last 4 digits of a tenant's social security number if they have one. The owner can use income certification from 2020 or 2021 if they have it, but if not, they will have to certify income in one of the alternative ways outlined in the SHERA policy and program overview. The tenant will have to sign and provide the property owner with a tenant attestation letter that agrees and gives permission to the property owner to apply on their behalf. And I want to reiterate that the tenant does not need to have a social security number in order to be eligible for SHERA. When applying for SHERA, it is required that property owners notify tenants regarding their applications at these points: when the application has been submitted, when the application has been approved or denied, and of the benefit payment notice for approved applications. And I think with that, I'll turn it back over to Rob.
Thank you, Cynthia. So we will review some resources and next steps. So we do have, there is a screenshot of the SHERA online portal that you see. So that is the online system that owners and authorized agents will be able to use to upload, both to register their themselves as owners, to add properties, and upload the actual applications, I'll just make a note that to add properties, you will receive a specific property ID number that would be provided by either Mass Housing, MHP, or DHCD, depending on your portfolio type. So I just wanted to put that out there to make you aware that the property ID number is going to be important for you in order to register properties in the portal. As far as additional resources, there is the website SHERA funding at mass.gov. On that website, there is both the portal as well as additional resources, including the SHERA policy and program materials, FAQs, as well as letters that sample letters that can be used for program implementation. Important next steps include reviewing these materials and also reaching out to SHERA at mass.gov if you have any questions. We are asking everyone to contact SHERA at mass.gov with any questions or comments about the program. So next steps. First, again, make sure that you become familiar with the SHERA program policy, as well as the owner agreement that owners must sign in order to participate in the program. On the SHERA funding at mass.gov website, there is also the SHERA application. So be sure that you familiarize yourself with the application. There is an application template included on the website, and this application template includes the information that you will need to collect for tenants with rent arrearages to ensure that the application is complete. You may already have some of this data in your tenant management system, and you may be able to pull reports to help populate that application, but we certainly want you to be aware of the application in advance of the phase opening. You will receive a notification when your phase is able to register and submit applications under SHERA. And finally, as far as next steps, send and share the owner letter to tenants, as well as the tenant certification that Cynthia had mentioned. The owner letter to tenants is designed to inform residents about the program, and the tenant certification is to verify eligibility and provide that tenant permission for you to apply on the tenant's behalf. Both of these documents have been made available in 7 different languages. So those documents are translated into those languages, and those translations of these letters are also available on the SHERA website. So before we do get into questions, I did want to go back on the owner agreement component because it's certainly an important component of the program, and we can just go back up to those 3 slides. Thank you. So just want to go through these again in a bit more detail. The owner agreement does outline responsibilities and commitments that an owner is making when participating in the SHERA program. First is to apply the benefit to the tenant's account within 30 days of receiving that assistance payment through SHERA. The second is suspending evictions and not initiating new evictions for non-payment of rent against households eligible for SHERA, and not doing so for 6 months after the last assistance payment is applied to the tenant's account in the property. By signing the agreement, the owner is also agreeing to reaching out proactively to households who are behind in their rent engaging proactively with residents in arrearages to create payment plans, support and accept rental assistance payments. Next slide, please. Continuing with owner obligations in the owner agreement is providing downward rent adjustments for income-based rents, if applicable, encouraging both structured and interactive landlord-tenant mediation, including the use of the state-funded no-cost community mediation program, which already exists and has been established under the Commonwealth's Eviction Diversion Initiative. And also informing tenants when applications are submitted, when payments are received and applied to their account, and if a payment is denied. As part of SHERA, there are compliance requirements, and the owner is required to instruct their auditor to incorporate protocols into their next audit for review of this funding application and payments. And if there is an overpayment or a duplicative payment, the owner is agreeing to repay those funds. A few more compliance-related requirements. The owner will be required to obtain and retain required documentation on tenant eligibility, submitting all required reports and requests through the online portal, certifying that each submission of an application, that all information is correct and complete, and finally, being subject to compliance reviews as may be required by DHCD. So I did just want to touch on those, on that specific criterion again, because it does include a lot of information about the obligations for owners to participate in SHERA. So I think with that, we can now take questions.
Great. We have some terrific questions, and let's start with a couple that are about owners' obligations in the case of tenants who have tenant income-based rent. And the owner agreement does require owners not to increase rent for participating tenants for 6 months or through 7/31/21. The question is, if tenant has a project-based Section 8 or MRVP, or a tenant-based Section 8 or MRVP or other rent subsidy, can their rent be adjusted either, through the tenant-based process at the property or by the housing authority? And would an owner then be in violation if the tenant income-based rent is adjusted? And Rob, would you answer that, please?
Sure. So the owner would not be required to freeze that rent for the income-based unit.
Okay, I hope that answers the question. Tenant income-based rents can be adjusted, and that is not a violation. So there are some questions about some of the documents that need to be submitted, some of the certifications, the owner compliance training certificate, and the owner agreement itself. And the question is, does this need to be, is this a document that you need to retain, or can it be signed by the management company on behalf of the owner? Cynthia, could you answer those questions, please?
Sure. I believe it can be signed on behalf of the owner. Both the owner agreement and the compliance training certificates will be online signatures on the portal. So, they will be part of the registration process.
Great, thank you. So we have a question that I would like to pitch to Rob, please. If a tenant has hit the wrapped maximum, but they still have an outstanding balance from the eligible period, will they qualify for SHERA assistance?
They will. There is no maximum benefit amount for SHERA. The requirement is that the assistance is for rent arrears only, and for the time period between April 1st, 2020 and March 31st, 2021. So there is an opportunity to apply through SHERA if the resident has already received raft payments. However, the payments must not be duplicative, meaning raft has not paid for rent arrears for the same time period.
Thank you. So we have a question about how it is that owners can and tenants can show evidence of financial hardship. Henry, would you answer that one for us, please?
For that one, tenants are required to self-attest. The requirement is for them to self-attest to the hardship, and that's the only requirement needed in that regard.
And do they need to submit their own letter, or can they use forms that are provided conveniently on the SHERA website in 7 languages?
They can use forms conveniently provided on shera.gov.
Thank you, Henry. Rob, how many times can an owner or property manager apply for residents in need of assistance?
That's a great question. There will be if an applicant is denied, the portal will notify the owner of that denial and provide reasons why. There may or may not be an opportunity to apply again based on that denial, but that is a great question that we can look further into.
Great. We have a number of questions about the pilot, which is currently underway. We have a question about whether people can apply to be participating in the pilot. We have questions about whether people will be notified if they're part of the pilot, how they'd know if they're part of the pilot. Cynthia, could you talk a little bit about the pilot and how that's proceeding, and how that will relate to the go live for the rest of eligible owners?
Sure. So the pilot is actually already in process. There are a group of pilot owners with pilot properties, with some both small owners or managers and large owners and managers. This has been a group that the team has been bouncing ideas off and asking them for input on the program since we started developing it way back in, I want to say, end of December, beginning of January. So it is in process. They're a group of volunteers that we're very grateful for, because we've have taken up a lot of their time and asked them to do a lot of work as it relates to the pilot process. So the pilot group has started to register their properties into, as we called it, a soft launch into SHERA, with the hope of allowing them to submit applications very soon. And what we're going to do with this pilot group is we really want to make sure that this process works well before we open it up to all owners. And with this pilot group, this is the group of properties that we're going to use and test to make sure that, from A to Z, from beginning to end, the process works well. The application works well, testing exceptions works well, getting payment out to properties works well. So this is kind of where we are right now, working with this pilot group to make sure that this portal works when we open it up for all of our properties as we go into phase 1 and phase 2. So we're working very hard with it. And as the portal is open up to phase 1, we will absolutely you will know, and we will keep in close contact with all of our owners and managers. And I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Mm-hmm.
There's a related question about housing authorities that I'd like to invite Rob to answer. The question is, it appears on the portal that only pilot entities can register at this time, which is correct. How about a housing authority? Should the housing authority wait for an email in order to be able to apply? Rob, could you speak to that, please?
Thanks, Lori. That's correct. Local housing authorities are part of the phase 2 rollout of SHERA. So prior to phase 2, local housing authorities will receive notification that they may register and apply on the online portal. But at this time, local housing authorities and other owners are not able to apply. It is just the pilot owners.
We have a question which, Rob, I'd like to ask you to answer as well. How much time do owners have to complete the process? Is there a date when the program will discontinue?
So we do encourage owners, as soon as their phase is open, to submit all of their applications within 60 days of their phase opening. We do expect that we have sufficient resources available to cover all qualified tenant arrearages in eligible properties through March 31st, 2021. But we do encourage owners to submit their applications within 60 days of their phase opening.
Thank you. We have some questions which, Rob, I'd like to ask you to answer as well about the projected dates for when people who are not part of the pilot will be open. There may be some uncertainty about that, but do you have anything you'd like to say about that, or how people will know when they'll know?
Absolutely. So as Cynthia mentioned, the pilot group is important for us to be able to make sure that the system is working the way it should, and that we're able to provide the assistance in the manner in which we intend on. And with that said, our goal is to open to phase 1 in early May, and following which time we would open to subsequent phases. But right now, our goal for phase 1 rollout is early May.
Rob, can you talk a little bit about what people can do in the meantime while they're getting ready for their phase to open?
Yeah, absolutely. So we would reiterate that owners and managers can start gathering the materials, getting familiar with the program requirements. So reading the policy, reaching out with any questions, and then utilizing the owner letter to tenants, as well as the tenant certification to start compiling that information so that you are ready when your phase is open and you're able to register on the portal and start submitting those applications.
Thank you. We have a question about owners who may have properties with different statuses. So if you're a public housing authority, but you have some properties that have relationships with mass housing, should you expect all of your properties to be in phase 1, phase 2? How will that work? And Henry, if you could answer this question, that would be great.
The way we have it structured, Lori, is that borrowers with owners with a borrower relationship with mass housing and MHP are in phase 1. Other borrowers other owners are in phase 2. And we have a group of owners who will be invited to participate in phase 3. Those are the 40B, 40R projects.
So if an owner has some properties in one phase and some properties in another phase, how will that work?
The owner is going to have to wait in terms of applications. The deals that have a borrower relationship would have to apply in phase 1 for that owner, and the deals that don't have a borrower relationship deals that will apply in phase 2, for example.
Thank you. So related to that, we have a question about properties and ID numbers. When will people find out their ID numbers, and how long will that take? Cynthia, can you answer that one, please?
Sure. So we will be sending out to owners and managers their list of properties with their property ID number. However, I will say the property ID number is your loan number with Mass Housing or MHP. So if you know already know your project ID number, that's what it will be. And in the case of DHCD's phase 2, we will also be sending out, the project ID numbers for those properties as well.
Thank you, Cynthia. We have a number of questions about what might happen if residents are caught up through March 31st, but if they stop paying rent within the 6-month window. And Rob, could I ask you to speak to that to the extent that you're able to at this time? If tenants stop paying rent sometime within that 6-month window, what are an owner's options? What assistance might the program be able to provide in the future?
Sure. So if a tenant is not paying rent past March 31st, we're trying to make clear that tenants are still required to pay rent. If they continue to are struggling to pay rent, they should be referred to an RA for assistance through ERAP if they are unable to pay future rent.
We have a question about how many times can the same household apply for raft? Since that's a raft question, I will pitch that to you, Rob, and maybe you can extend that answer to SHERA as well.
Yeah, as far as raft, I'm unfamiliar with how many times a tenant can apply through raft. Through SHERA, what we're encouraging is a single application for each household, because each application can consist of and should consist of numerous households. We're encouraging that those households apply only once for that time period of April 1st, 2020 through March 31st, 2021.
When do you think we might know about whether additional SHERA funds will be available after this first round of assistance that covers arrearages through March 31st, 2021? Rob, do you have a sense of that?
Yeah, so we'll be reevaluating the program at the end of May in terms of additional resources. We can't guarantee whether or not additional resources will be available at that time for future arrearages, but that is something that we will look at, both in terms of how the funds are used in accordance with the Treasury's priorities, as well as the need across the Commonwealth. But the way that the program is funded right now, we do have sufficient resources to cover the rent arrears for that time period of April 1st through March 31st, 2021.
Rob, I can chime in on the RAFT or ERAP, Emergency Rental Assistance Program question for folks who are applying through, for tenants who are applying through regional administering agencies, RAAs. They can apply for up to 12 months of arrears. And then within the COVID impact and within the time frame. And then for 3 months of stipends if they're not income-based, if they don't have income-based rental subsidies. So at the moment, that's what the application can cover in terms of how often someone can apply for. They can get up to a total of 15 months of assistance.
Thank you, Aviva.
So we have a question which I would like to ask Cynthia if she would address. Somebody owes March 2020 rent as of April 1st, and then they pay that, and then they owe April rent as of April 30th, and they pay that. So they're always a month or two behind. For what months should the owner request SHERA funds?
An owner can request SHERA funds for rent starting as of April 1st, 2020. SHERA cannot pay, if this is federal funds, so we cannot pay rent arrearages owed anything that predates April 1st, 2020. So for rental arrearages from the date April 1st, 2020 through March 31st, 2021, the SHERA program can pay those arrearages.
If somebody has been paying as they go, but is currently a couple of months behind, does one of our panelists want to say what 2 months should be claimed for SHERA?
If the 2 months,
I'm struggling to understand the question.
Right, if they're 2 months behind, apply for the 2 months that they're behind if those dates are in between, April 1st, 2020 and March 31st, 2021. So any rent owed within those periods is eligible for funding.
Okay, thank you. I think we have answered all the questions that have appeared in the Q&A. So if there are any more questions, please pop them in there. There's a question about whether the Q&A will be provided for the questions asked today. I'm wondering, Aviva or Claire, if you're able to answer that, if there will be a actual typed answer to the Q&A provided for questions today.
Sure, we are working on a very, very extensive FAQ for owners, which will go up on the owner portal. And it will be a living, breathing document. So as we kind of comb through any questions that were asked today that aren't already in the FAQ, we will, work to add them. And then as other questions come up, whether through other training sessions or presentations, we'll have an ongoing review and adding process. So I definitely recommend keeping an eye out for that since it will be constantly updated.
So we have a question here about if somebody, and Henry, I'm hoping that you can answer this. If somebody owes an EIV balance, and since they're behind in their regular rent, they have not made their EIV payments for several months, can their agreed upon EIV rent monthly payment also be included in the rent being requested?
No, because we are only paying rent arrearages. Nothing else should be submitted for payment through this program.
We have a question about how the funds are being distributed, whether the funds will go through an agency program such as RAFT, or how exactly a property manager can request those funds. Cynthia, could I ask you to answer that question?
Sure. So the property manager should go into the SHERA portal to request the funds when the portal is open for, phase 1 and phase 2 borrowers. So you're applying through the website itself. So you're not going into an agency. It's through the portal itself.
And who will be paid when the request is made if it's approved?
The owner is the entity that will be paid through this program. And so the owner will be paid, and then the owner within 30 days will apply the rental arrearages approved and funded to the tenants, the applicable tenants.
There is a question about whether funding can cover future rent payments. And the second, well, let's take that part of this question first. Can tenants apply for future rent payments through SHERA? Henry, could you answer that one, please?
Not at this time. There could be a possibility in the future for that to be possible, but at this time we are only paying for rent arrearages from April of last year through March 31st of 2021.
Cynthia, the next part of the question I'm going to ask you to address. What if there's an overpayment? If a tenant has applied through RAFT and then subsequently through SHERA, and both of those get issued to the owner, what are the owner's obligations in that situation?
In that situation, the owner will be obligated to return the funds to the SHERA program because it is we can't have a double payment for of the same arrearages.
We have a question which I would like Rob to answer about whether people can have access to the portal for informational purposes. Are people able to access the documents on the site even if they are not yet available to register for the program and submit applications?
Yes, if you do go to the SHERA funding.mass.gov website, the program information materials is available despite even if you haven't yet registered.
Great, thank you. There's a question about who can apply. Can a resident services coordinator request these funds on behalf of residents? Cynthia, could you answer that one, please?
Could the resident services coordinator do the application? Yes, you can be a user in the system and upload the application. I think when it comes though to the owner agreement and the owner certification, you may or may not be able to sign that. But yes, you could actually be the one to do the actual application for the project. And I'll leave it up to if you're authorized to sign on behalf of the owner, you can also sign the owner agreement as well. But yes, it doesn't. The users in the systems are not that restricted.
There have been a number of questions about whether rental assistance will be available for periods after March 31st, 2021. And Rob, could I ask you to address that about, I think you've spoken to this a bit before, but if you can maybe reiterate your answer to that question about whether additional SHERA funds will be available after the first round of funding that covers arrearages through March 31st, 2021.
Sure, absolutely. So as of now, we're confident that we have enough funding to cover the arrearages for all of these portfolios during that time period. We'll reevaluate if we have the ability to extend the time period. We will reevaluate that at the end of May. So as in terms of whether we can go out through April of this year, May, June, so on and so forth. But at this time, we cannot commit to extending the eligible period past March 31st of 2021, but it is something we will take a look at.
Great, thank you. So some additional information that people might want. One question is, do we expect there to be more training sessions available in the next few weeks, particularly about working with residents? So why don't I direct that to Rob and maybe Aviva and Claire as well.
Yeah, so our goal is to support the owners as well as advocates in terms of utilizing this program. So additional training opportunities is something that we intend on providing. And also using the guidance that is available on the website through the policy, the program overview, the frequently asked questions that Aviva had mentioned. But it is our intention to continue to support you through additional trainings as we move forward.
Great. Rob, can I also ask you to talk about what the basic functions are, in addition to collecting information and finding all the forms needed to work with tenants? What will the process involve of applying through the website? What will owners and their representatives, property managers, resident services coordinators, what will they need to do? What are the different steps on the website that people will go, on the portal that people will go through?
Sure, and before I kind of start, this is something that we will provide written guidance on in terms of how to navigate the portal itself. But generally, there are kind of three major steps. The first is you're registering as an owner. And to register as an owner, you do need a tax ID number. And you're then adding properties. So depending on the phase that is open, you will be able to add one or more properties as a registered owner. And as part of that, you're uploading a W-9. You also have an opportunity to request a direct deposit for payment. And at that stage, before you can apply, the owner does need to complete the owner agreement. As Cynthia mentioned, that document you will be able to sign electronically in the portal itself, as well as completing the owner training compliance certificate to make sure that the owner entity is meeting the prerequisite training requirements. Once you have added a property, you'll use your property ID to add that property. You can then upload an application. And one of the big benefits of SHERA is that a single application can include multiple requests for tenant arrearage payments, rental arrearage payments. So unlike ERAP or RAFT, where each individual household has to go through the regional administering agency, through SHERA, owners can compile all of their tenant applications and submit through one application through the SHERA portal.
Great, thank you. I think we're at the top of the hour now. So do we have closing and thanking remarks? We have a designated closer.
Again, I want to thank all the participants for taking their time to join us this morning. This program is very important to our residents, and I hope that we continue to make it work as well as we can.
And I would like to second Henry's sentiments on that, and to also thank you for coming and joining us this morning for this panel.
Likewise, thank you everyone for your time today, and please feel free to reach out with any questions on SHERA@mass.gov.